The super empath the avoidant can't erase, no matter how hard they try. There comes a point where you stop asking, why didn't they see my worth? And you start realizing they did. That's exactly why they ran. You see, when a super empath loves, they don't love halfway, they see through you, into you, in ways most people never will. And for someone who's avoidant, that kind of connection feels like standing in front of a mirror they didn't ask for. Avoidants crave closeness, but only up to the point where it threatens their control. So when a super empath comes along, someone whose love is deep, steady, and emotionally fluent, it can feel overwhelming. They'll pull away. They'll minimize. They'll ghost. But here's the secret. You can't erase a super empath. You can delete their number, but not their impact. You can avoid their presence, but not the emotional standard they set. Because the empath doesn't just give love, they redefine it. And once someone's been seen at that depth, ordinary connection never feels the same again. So if you've ever felt like you were too much, understand this. Your depth wasn't the problem, it was their mirror. Keep your heart open, your boundaries firm, and your standards high, because the right person won't be frightened by your empathy. They'll be grounded by it. Empathy is often misunderstood as softness, as if feeling deeply automatically makes you fragile. But real empathy, the kind that sees beneath words, senses the shifts in energy, and feels what others can't say, is not a weakness. It's a quiet, powerful intelligence. It's awareness on a frequency most people haven't yet learned to tune into. When you carry that kind of sensitivity, you don't just hear what people say, you feel the truth underneath it. You sense discomfort, fear, and even the walls people build to keep love out. And because you notice what others miss, your responses carry precision. You know when to hold space and when to step back. You know how to calm chaos without suppressing it. That's not fragility. That's mastery. But the world often teaches empaths to tone it down, to shrink their sensitivity to make others comfortable. You've probably heard phrases like, you're too sensitive, or you care too much. The truth is people say that because they don't know what to do with emotional fluency. When someone hasn't developed the capacity to meet that level of depth, they mistake it for intensity. What they don't realize is that empathy gives you emotional data others don't have. You can read a room faster than anyone else. You can sense tension before it turns into conflict. You can feel someone's pull back long before they admit it. That's intuition sharpened by experience. Empathy is power because it guides you to act with emotional precision. It lets you lead conversations in a way that brings understanding instead of escalation. It helps you navigate love, work, and life with wisdom that facts alone can't provide. When you know how to channel empathy, you can influence without controlling, connect without losing yourself, and heal without taking on someone else's wounds. It becomes your internal compass, pointing you toward truth, authenticity, and alignment. But like any power, empathy becomes destructive when it's misused. If you give too much of it without boundaries, it drains you. You start carrying the emotions of others as if they were your own. That's when your gift starts to feel like a curse. The shift happens when you realize that empathy isn't about absorbing. It's about understanding. You can see someone's pain without taking responsibility for fixing it. You can care deeply without losing yourself in their chaos. That's when empathy turns from emotional exhaustion into emotional mastery. The people who try to dismiss or devalue your empathy often do so because it exposes what they've avoided within themselves. It mirrors back to them their emotional distance, their guardedness, their fear of vulnerability. So when they pull away, it's not because your empathy is too much. It's because your presence reveals too much. You represent the kind of connection that demands emotional truth, and not everyone is ready for that. But those who will find your empathy magnetic. They'll recognize its power because they've spent years searching for that kind of depth. So when you start seeing your empathy as power instead of a burden, you stop apologizing for it. You stop shrinking. You start choosing where to place it. And with that, everything changes. Avoidants don't run because they don't care. They run because they care in ways they don't know how to handle. When you've spent your life equating closeness with danger or rejection, intimacy feels like standing in front of a spotlight that exposes everything you've tried to hide. For someone with avoidant tendencies, love doesn't just represent connection. It represents the potential for loss, judgment, or suffocation. So when a deeply empathetic person enters their life, offering genuine understanding and emotional safety, It can feel like too much light too soon. It disrupts the protective distance they've built to feel safe. Avoidants crave love like anyone else, but they want it on terms that don't require emotional nakedness. They want connection without vulnerability, affection without accountability. When a super empath comes along, someone who naturally invites openness, honesty, and emotional presence, it activates the avoidant's deepest conflict, the desire to be seen, versus the fear of being known. They feel drawn in by your warmth and stability, but at the same time, they feel exposed. That inner push and pull becomes overwhelming. Their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to retreat. Your empathy doesn't scare them because it's loud. It scares them because it's accurate. You notice the tiny pauses in their tone, the way they avoid eye contact when the topic hits too close to home, the emotional absences between their words. You ask questions that pierce through the mask they've worn for years, and for a moment they feel both understood and unsafe. When someone who's avoidant senses that level of recognition, their nervous system interprets it as a threat. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they associate intimacy with pain. Their avoidance is protection disguised as indifference. The tragedy is that you can't love an avoidant into safety. No amount of reassurance or patience can override the defense mechanisms they've spent years reinforcing. They have to choose to see the wall they've built and decide to lower it themselves. Until then, your empathy will always feel like too much truth, too much closeness, too much reflection. But that doesn't mean your love was wasted. In fact, it often leaves an imprint they can't erase. Because even if they walk away, they'll remember what it felt like to be seen without judgment, to be cared for without demand. When an avoidant meets an empath, they're introduced to a new standard of connection, one that's calm, authentic, and safe. And though they might retreat from it, the memory of that feeling lingers. They may find themselves comparing every new connection to the emotional resonance they once felt with you. They'll search for it again, even if they don't realize it. But the truth remains, their fear of emotional exposure isn't a reflection of your inadequacy, it's a mirror of their unhealed wounds. You didn't cause their distance, you just illuminated what they've been avoiding. And sometimes that light is exactly what starts their path toward healing, even if they have to take it without you. When a super empath connects with someone, they don't just enter a person's life, they alter the emotional landscape of it. Their presence carries depth, warmth, and awareness that goes beyond ordinary affection. It's not about intensity, it's about authenticity. When an empath loves, they do it with full presence. They listen between the words, they understand moods without explanation, and they nurture without expectation. That kind of connection creates an imprint that lingers long after the physical bond ends. Even when an avoidant person distances themselves or cuts off contact, they can't erase the emotional memory of being seen so completely. It becomes a quiet benchmark, something that subconsciously reshapes how they experience future connections. The imprint of an empath isn't about drama or dependency. It's subtle, but it runs deep. You might not be in their life anymore, but the moments you shared replay in small ways, in the songs that once played in the background, in the calm they felt in your presence, in the emotional ease they didn't realize they were capable of feeling. That's what makes the connection unforgettable. It wasn't the words, it was the feeling. You didn't just love them. You understood them in ways they hadn't understood themselves. And even if they pushed you away, that understanding stays with them, echoing in their quieter moments. Avoidant individuals often convince themselves that detachment equals freedom. They may think that walking away from emotional intensity will bring them relief. But what they find instead is silence. A hollow kind of peace that doesn't satisfy. Because what they've really walked away from isn't pressure, it's connection. They might try to replace it with distraction, new relationships, or solitude, but nothing feels the same. That's the mark of a super empath. You become the reference point for what real connection feels like, the way your presence made vulnerability safe, the way your calm steadied their uncertainty, the way your empathy made them feel known without judgment. In time, they might realize that your absence feels louder than your presence ever did. The emotional standard you set becomes a measure they unconsciously compare others to. They might meet new people, but the dynamic feels off. Either too shallow, too distant, or too performative. Because once someone has experienced real emotional transparency, it's hard to go back to surface level connection. The memory of your energy becomes both comfort and discomfort. Comfort because it reminds them that depth exists, discomfort because it reveals how much they pushed it away. For the empath, understanding this truth brings peace. You don't need to chase validation or wonder if your love mattered. It did. It always does. The avoidant may never admit it, but they carry traces of you in their growth, in their reflections, and in the way they eventually learn to open up. Your impact is not erased by their distance. It's preserved by the contrast between what they had with you and what they find without you. Boundaries are the quiet power of the super empath. For someone who feels everything deeply, it can be easy to confuse love with rescue and compassion with obligation. You sense people's pain and instinctively you want to soothe it. You want to make things better to bring light into their darkness. But without boundaries, empathy turns heavy. You begin to carry emotions that aren't yours, fix problems that aren't your responsibility, and stretch yourself thin in the name of love. That's when your gift starts to drain you. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are filters that protect your peace, your energy, and your emotional clarity. They allow you to give from fullness instead of depletion. When you set boundaries, you're not rejecting anyone. You're respecting yourself. It's a declaration that says, I can care about you without losing me. For an empath, this distinction is everything. You're naturally wired to connect, to understand, to give, but that same openness can attract people who mistake kindness for availability. The avoidant, the emotionally unavailable, the takers, they're drawn to your steadiness, your patience, your ability to absorb their chaos without judgment. At first, they feel safe in your energy, but without boundaries, that safety becomes one-sided. You end up overextending, trying to hold the emotional balance for two people while slowly fading into exhaustion. Boundaries shift that dynamic. They remind both you and the other person that your empathy is a gift, not a resource to be drained. A boundary can be as simple as saying no without guilt or choosing not to explain yourself every time you pull back. It's deciding that your emotional health is not up for negotiation. It's understanding that silence can be a form of self-respect and walking away can be an act of love. For yourself, people who truly value you will respect those limits because they see the strength behind them. Those who don't will test, guilt, or withdraw. But their reaction reveals their capacity, not your worth. Boundaries expose what kind of relationship you're in. They clarify who's capable of meeting you in balance and who's only there for what they can take. Empaths often fear that setting boundaries will make them seem cold or unloving, but the opposite is true. Healthy boundaries make your empathy sustainable. They help you show up with presence and authenticity instead of resentment and fatigue. They ensure that your care comes from choice, not compulsion. And when you live this way, your energy becomes cleaner, your relationships calmer, and your love more intentional. You stop chasing emotional reciprocity because you've already given it to yourself. You stop trying to prove your worth through self-sacrifice because you finally understand that your capacity to give is powerful, but only when it's protected. Boundaries don't diminish your empathy. They refine it. They turn it from something that costs you peace into something that creates it. The right person won't be intimidated by your depth. They'll feel safe in it. When you've spent years being told you're too sensitive, too emotional, or too intense, it's easy to believe that your capacity for connection is something to hide. You start to dilute yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your full heart. But the truth is, your depth isn't the problem. It's a filter. It separates those who crave comfort from those who crave truth. The right person will not just tolerate your empathy, they'll value it. They'll see it as the rare form of understanding that it is, and instead of pulling away, they'll meet you there. When two emotionally aware people connect, there's no performance, no guessing, no endless chase. It's not about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about peace. The right person won't make you question your worth or your place in their life. They won't punish you for caring too much or accuse you of expecting too much. Instead, they'll honor the way you love. They'll match your openness with reassurance, your vulnerability with safety, your presence with consistency. The connection will feel steady, not shaky, because healthy love isn't built on intensity, it's built on understanding. For someone who's been through cycles with avoidant partners, this kind of love can feel unfamiliar at first. You might even mistake calm for boredom because your nervous system has been conditioned to equate emotional highs and lows with passion. But the right person won't create chaos to prove they care. They'll create security. They'll communicate instead of disappear. They'll stay when things get uncomfortable instead of retreating into silence. Their presence will teach you that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. It doesn't have to test your limits to prove its depth. When you meet someone who can handle your emotional range, you'll finally understand why the others couldn't. You'll see that it was never about being too much. It was about being too real for those still hiding from themselves. The right person will not only appreciate your empathy, but will also reciprocate it. They'll notice your moods the way you've always noticed others. They'll ask how you feel before you have to explain it. They'll make space for your thoughts instead of making you feel guilty for having them. That's what matching your depth looks like. Mutual awareness, not emotional labor. This kind of connection doesn't just happen by accident. It happens when you stop chasing emotional potential and start choosing emotional maturity. When you hold your standards, you attract those capable of meeting them. The right person won't see your boundaries as rejection. They'll see them as strength. They won't confuse your empathy with weakness. They'll see it as wisdom. They won't shrink from your light. They'll expand in it. Because the right love doesn't drown your depth. It mirrors it, matches it, and multiplies it. When you finally understand your own depth, you stop trying to prove it. You stop chasing people who can't meet you where you stand. You stop shrinking your empathy to fit inside someone else's emotional limitations. Being a super empath isn't about fixing others. It's about honoring yourself. It's realizing that your ability to feel deeply is a gift, not a burden. It's recognizing that the right person won't make you question your sensitivity. They'll feel grateful for it. Because your empathy, your insight, your way of loving, these are the very things that turn ordinary connection into something sacred. Every time you've been dismissed, ghosted, or told you were too much, it wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of what the other person wasn't ready to face within themselves. But even in their absence, your impact remains. You leave an emotional fingerprint that can't be erased. You awaken something in people, a longing for honesty, safety, and realness. And that energy never disappears. It lingers, teaching them in silence what love could feel like if they were brave enough to receive it. So stand tall in your empathy. Keep your heart open, but guard it with wisdom. Love boldly, but never at the cost of yourself. The avoidant may have walked away, but you walk forward, wiser, softer, and stronger than before. You are not the one who lost, you are the one who illuminated. And those who can't handle your light will always remember its warmth even from afar. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for allowing your heart to stay open in a world that often asks you to close it. If no one has told you lately, your empathy is powerful, your presence matters, and your love is unforgettable. Keep shining, keep feeling, and never apologize for being the person who loves deeply in a world that sometimes forgets how. Thank you truly. Stay kind, stay grounded, and remember, the right person won't be afraid of your heart. They'll rise to meet it.